Morning. Yep, and we're up and rolling. So, good morning and happy Wednesday. Want to welcome everybody to the third annual Ignite Recap Security Summit. My name is Patrick Anderson. I'll be your co-moderator today. On with us is Paul Edlin, the Microsoft Midwest CTO, and then Grady Pace with a new and improved role, Senior Security Specialist. But we do have an awesome agenda planned for you, but just want to put in a few logistics. If you do have questions, you can put those on the right-hand side of your screen in the chat, and Grady and I will do our best to answer those as we go, or have Paul discuss them directly. And do want to call out that the session is being recorded, so if you are uncomfortable with that, now would be the time to drop. And so what I want to do, just give Grady a chance to say a few words, and then we'll kick it to Paul and get things rolling.
Thank you, Patrick. So Grady Pace, as Patrick mentioned, Senior Security Specialist here at Microsoft. I actually cover our semiconductor companies. So if you've got a chip in your computer, which you all do, I probably talk to them on a daily basis now. Nice to meet you. One other thing I'll say, if you go up into the upper left-hand corner of your Teams, if you're in the app, you go to change your view, you can set it to gallery. And if you go on the three dots for more, you can actually go full screen. So when we're in presentation mode, you can actually see the presentation in full screen. So a couple things to help you out there with how to view the presentation from Paul. And with that, Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, hey everybody. So, yeah, it's hard to imagine that this is the third time that we've done this stuff. That means we've been doing this for a long time. So, the benefit of this session is that I try and cut all the marketing crud out of these decks and all the other stuff and just get right to the point with the technology stuff. So, there's going to be, I think I've got 5 slides, and it's all just it's visual cue for what I'm going to demonstrate or show you. So there's not a lot of PowerPoint here. It's mostly things that we're going to be talking about. So who am I? So Paul, I work out of a group of our facilities called the Microsoft Technology Centers. There are 15 of these in the United States, and I think 44 of them around the globe. And they're staffed with people like me who are not salesy. We are solution-y. So, what we focus on is strategies and solutions. And so in my role, I actually focus on cybersecurity, kind of end to end, what we do internally, as well as what we advocate that you guys do. So that's part one of my brain. The other parts are talking about our research and development, and then which is all science, and talking about it in a way that is not sciencey. So I read what scientists say, and then I try and figure out a way to tell it to a fourth grader. And then I also talk about our data center strategies. And so we've had calls previously with Patrick and Grady where we've gone through some of that stuff as well. And we look for your feedback. If there's things that you would like to cover out of those, we'd be happy to deliver it. Anyway, so with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here and just give you a little bit of context. No marketing, but context, okay? I just want you guys to understand where our heads are at. So hang on one second. I'm going to share my screen, and we will go from there. So let me shrink everything down here. I got one deck up and running here, which I'm going to use to walk through this. So let's just start here. And I said there's no marketing in here, but I just want you to kind of understand where our heads are at. This is a problem that I run into all the time in security. Forget the marketing elements here. Is that, security people will often, when I get into deep conversations with CISOs, what I hear most frequently is, we don't have enough staff. We're always trying to stretch budgets hyper thin, we're cobbling together information. And yet there's all this board level pressure to respond when some craziness happens, like SolarWinds or, Petya, non-Petya, or Log4j, or Nobelium. When any of these things hit the world, inevitably somebody's going to contact you and be like, what's our strategy to fix it? Much like you, this is the way I feel too. What the hell is that? So when Log4j shipped, my wife told me, hey, there's some big thing going on in security. Are you aware of it? I'm like, I have no idea what Log4j is. I'm sorry. I should, but I don't. So I had to go research it, right? Ultimately, the goal that I think that Microsoft, or the benefit of Microsoft offers you is it all works together. Everything's tied together, and that you're not gluing things. Now, You could take the perspective of, well, we're best of breed. Yeah, but when you go best of breed, by the way, we are best of breed too, which is ironic. So we're leaders in almost all of this stuff. But when you go best of breed with disparate solutions, you're gluing all that together. It doesn't, ultimately, it doesn't make your signal go faster. It makes your operational times go lower. So I'm off of the marketing. Big picture though, like if you think of what bad guys think of, they don't care about server, switches, routers, storage, phones, tablets, whatever, IoT devices. What they think of is how are things connected? Yep. So we have to have a strategy that allows us to cover everything in your environment, including your printers for security, including your webcams, including your shop floor machinery, right? And all of it needs to be tied together, because ultimately what the bad guy thinks of is like, how can I use this thing here to get to that thing over there? Ultimately, they want to do something, right? But what they're trying to do, these are just resources that you provide them with to move from A to B to C. So when we talk about protecting everything, everyone, everywhere, we mean servers, switches, routers, storage, phones, webcams, printers, PCs, servers, laptops, everything that you can think of, right? And the benefit is that when a breach happens, you know how they went from A to B to C to D. Yep. So these are some of the things in our stack. And if you've seen this, if you've seen some of my presentations, I've talked about this before, but I'm just going to briefly touch on some of these. The thing I want you to take away from this entire slide is that there is nothing to integrate. These are integrated. So if you want to understand how somebody's using data to get to keys, to look at an endpoint, to get to a server over here, and then maybe look at your source code, it's all stitched together, right? The question is what are you doing with it? And if you bring, this is also not to say that Microsoft thinks I should unbundle everything that you're already doing today and displace it. That would be lovely. And just displace it with Microsoft. That would be lovely, but we're realists too. Okay, so the idea here to figure out is how does this data flow around so that if you're not using part of our stuff for your services, that we can still integrate with whatever stuff you have, right? So it's not to say that everything has to be deployed from Microsoft. Okay, but as you look through some of these, some of the more interesting ones from my perspective is like Defender for Identity on the lower left, right? Which is your on-premise Active Directory things looking for security stuff like SAMR request, forward reconnaissance attacks, brute force, password sprays, curb roasting, skeleton key, golden ticket, all of these, identity security things that you think of, but it's all on premise. Up in the cloud, we're doing the same thing with Azure Active Directory identity protection. There's just nothing to deploy. This runs on your domain controllers. This runs in the cloud. Yeah. And they work together. So when you have a breach, you know how the identity in your on-prem is tied to the identity in the cloud. We can use your keys as signal. There's some interesting stuff here in key management, by the way, where we can actually use these as tripwires. So if somebody trips over a key or a secret, it shows up in something like Sentinel. That's called deception tech or like honey tokens. So we're actually built, I think one of the things that you'll probably see from Microsoft is we're going to push on this deception tech honey token stuff and make it easier. But essentially, we generate threat intelligence. I'm going to show you some of that today. We also use threat intelligence, and we share that, what we learn with you. I'm going to show you some of that. IoT signals. So this is, like I said, your printers, your webcams, your wireless access points, your servers, your switches, your routers, your storage. It doesn't matter where those things are, by the way. So when I talk about server, switches, router, storage, or IoT devices, or any of those other things, it doesn't matter if it's in AWS or Google or Azure or in VMware, on-prem, it doesn't make any difference to us where it is. We can talk to all of it, okay? Endpoints, things that we've already, like things that you would expect, data, DLP, as well as data usage. And this can be structured data like Oracle databases living on premise or SQL servers in AWS. We don't care. We can use that as signal. Your Office 365 usage in Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive. Your CASB, this is our CASB down here, which is your SaaS application usage. So, being able to say something like, I don't want you putting credit cards on Box. You can put them in ServiceNow, right? So we can sit in the middle there, or say, if you take something off of Box, I will encrypt it, right? It's fine while it's up there, but if you try and remove it, I'm gonna wrap it with a certificate like encryption so that nobody can use it if it travels outside of Box. We can do that kind of stuff. We look at your source code. I'm going to show you some of this, and your AI models. This is the reason why we're going here, is because that's where the bad guys are going. They use the soft underbelly of what's available to them. And one of the places that we weren't very covered was in source code as a globe. By the way, you see various people trying to push on this, but like they're just, whoa, the lighting just went off in this room. I must not have a soul. Hang on a second. Hold on. There you go. I had to move. So like I'm like 10 feet away from the motion sensor over there, and I guess it didn't see me moving enough. Anyway, so like but your source code is like a place where we need to start protecting. By the way, source code. This could also be things like the Terraform templates that you do, or Bicep or ARM templates in Azure, for example. So it's not just source code, but it also can be build automation kind of stuff too. Same thing with AI models. People write crummy Python code. Bad guys use that as an attack vector. Right? Developers aren't really security people. And I think this is another place, if I push out, beyond another year here, what you're going to see is Microsoft has a team called Morse. And what we're starting to build is tooling that stops the developer from writing bad code in real time. We're there. We're just going to keep pushing on that a little bit harder in the coming year with Morse. So if you do a search for Microsoft Morse, you'll figure out what that is quickly. But yeah. Anyways, so like I said, the thing I want you to take away from this screen, though, just a little bit of context setting, was that all this is integrated. It all talks to each other. The question of it is, what pieces of these signal do you want to use, or what have you licensed is another problem. I'm not talking about licensing today, but it always bubbles its head up and says, well, I'm only, this license, so I can't get access to that. Maybe, yeah. And also, but you can always buy these things, almost all of them, a la carte. Anyways, I'll move on. I'm not a licensing person. I don't like licensing conversations. So Microsoft security revolves around these 6 core buckets. And I'm going to talk about 4 of them today. I don't think I'm going to touch on Sentinel much. We didn't make any major Ignite announcements around Sentinel, but we have a bunch of stuff coming up in private and public preview that I will talk about maybe on a subsequent webcast. So I'm not going to talk about Priva, and I'm not going to talk about Sentinel. So Sentinel is our SIM, and Priva is around privacy management. Okay, so think things like GDPR, CCPA. Here in Illinois, where I live, BIPA, BIPA. New York has one, but the idea there is around being able to perform data subject usage of information so that a user can say, hey, I want to be forgotten, or I want you to tell me what you know about me. Yeah, so that's what Priva does. What I am going to focus on is Entra, Purview, Intune, and Defender a little bit today, and just talk about a few of those. Many things I have to demo here, so there's a lot of demo. I'm almost done with the slides, believe it or not. There's a lot of things to demo here. But I'm going to stay within those 4 buckets. Okay. So I left this slide in here, but the idea here is that, we do cover all of the cloud platforms. So AWS, Google, Azure, obviously, and on-prem. And we've been doing on-prem for a long time. That's the one I feel like we've got the longest ability to be able to do. It feels even more than Azure, it sometimes feels like. So some of the announcements that we made. Part 1 was around automatic endpoint ransomware disruption. So what does this mean? So let me just show you. So first of all, I'm going to use this as a building block, and then I'll show you what is actually happening. So not this, hold on. So I'll just launch another tab. What are we, I'm going to show you what we use as a building block. Okay. So this is security.microsoft.com. This is the place where all of our native tooling talks. So we have one portal for all of our security stuff. So Defender for identity, Defender for cloud apps, Defender for Office 365, etc. And so if you look down here at, well, let me just go into an incident, for example. So if I go into incidents and I look at this, I kicked this off last night. I did an attack on this environment. If you looked over here at the devices in an incident, okay, you will notice on the upper right-hand corner, hello, oh, I got to go into the device itself. Please hold. So in the device, we have this ability to isolate it, okay? So when I'm looking at an incident, I can kind of pivot through like the files that were used or an email that might have come in, and then the identities that were on the device, and I can look at the machines. So in this context of an overarching incident, what I'm looking at is the machines that were involved in the incident. And what you'll notice is that I can isolate the device. Now, this is me doing it manually. Okay, so what happens in this new announcement that we made is if I look at the incident, what you will start seeing under this, what we have right now is this thing called the graph view. And then we have a summary over here. And the summary kind of gives you an overview of what occurred. And this is the primary screen right now. So when you click into the incident, it shows summary by default. What it's going to move towards is the graph, and it's going to take this and move it to the left and call it attack story. So if I click on the graph, what you see is actually the timeline of what occurred, okay? And if I hit play attack story, it will actually just play it out over time and tell you exactly how the attack started and how it just kind of evolved. And on the right-hand side, what you would see is if it involved multiple machines or multiple files, this machine, it all ran in one place. But if there were multiple identities, multiple machines involved, it would show you how those were traversing over time, okay? What's going to happen when we move this graph to attack story is that there will be a box that will show up, and I'll show you what it looks like here, that will actually say to you, I know that that's fuzzy, but it says Microsoft 365 Defender automatically disrupted an identified ransomware attack. And essentially what it's going to do is for the machines, and you can kind of see right here and here these little it says auto suspended or auto contained. What it's going to do is it will start containing the devices. So that's what it did here, where it said auto contain the machine. Now this is a user. What it did is auto suspended the user. So if I go back to the incident and I looked at the incident itself and I said, well, show me the users. Now in this case, there's no users. Let me see if I looked at a user, what you would see is I could, on the upper right-hand side, I could suspend the user. So I'll see if I can find another one here, just as an malware incident on one machine. Let's see if I can find an identity on one of these real quick. No users on that one. Hang on, I should have had this teed up, guys. This is my fault. But like unusual file deletion, maybe this will have a user. Come on, man. Got nothing with a user in it. Investigation priority score increase. Defender. I was just seeing if maybe I'm trying to not hunt around. So I apologize for hunting. Yeah. Okay. So anyways, if I looked at one with a user, I could actually go in and disable the user. Now what's happening though in the automatic disruption is it's going to do that for you. So I apologize for jumping around here, guys. I've only got a screenshot of this one because I don't have it in my tenant. So when you look at this, when you see a disruption, what's happening is today I could do that manually. I could suspend a user or I could isolate a machine. And when I do that, they can't do anything. The isolated machine can only talk to me as a management node. I can't talk to anything else and nothing can talk to it. But what's going to happen is the tool is going to do that on your behalf if you allow it to. Okay, so we don't just have security tools making random decisions. It's going, if you tell it to break up a ransomware, disrupt a ransomware attack automatically, it will do that. Otherwise, what it may do is ask you for an approval. And usually with any automation that we have in our stack, you can set it up so that it does it when you tell it to automate. So this is what it looks like. I'm sorry, and I know it's, like I said, I know it's small and fuzzy. It's because this is the only screenshot that they gave us of it happening, and you're seeing just auto-contained, auto-disrupted, et cetera, et cetera. And this is what that attack story will do. I hope that makes sense. I apologize for not having an identity to show you where I could, all you'd see is Paul, for example, and it would be like suspend Paul. And it would show me all the things that Paul had done. Okay. Let's go back to PowerPoint for a second. I need it to tell me what to do next. So the next thing here is contextual cloud security posture management. So this one is fun in the sense that CSPM is useful in that when you have all of these, so let me stay on the slide because otherwise you're going to be looking at that screen, not moving. So we've had cloud security posture management in Defender for Cloud for a long time. Okay, we called it something else other than CSPM initially, and then to align with the way that the rest of the world thinks, we changed it to CSPM. So what does cloud security posture management mean? What it means is that you have a lot. So let's just say that let's say you've got 200 servers and all the things that they're connected to. So you've got all the switches, the routers, the storage, the load balancers, firewalls, et cetera. So you've got all of this infrastructure across, let's say you've got it in AWS and Google and Azure and on-premise. And what CSPM means is that, like, given all of the stuff in your environment, what should you focus on to remediate first? Like, what's the worst of the security holes in your infrastructure? So what CSPM would do, Cloud Security Posture Management, tells you is, like, given the complexity of your stuff, here's what you should do first to kill off the biggest attack vectors. Here's what you should do second, third, fourth, fifth, right? That's what CSPM does. What contextual CSPM does for us is it allows you to almost investigate your environment and not look at it based on, CVEs or vulnerabilities, but instead pivot based on what's happening in the real world. Okay, so let me show you I'll give you a few examples, and then hopefully this will make sense. So you see this external attack surface management, attack paths, threat intelligence, and Cloud Security Explorer. I'll show you each of these. Let's just start with the Cloud Security Explorer, okay? So if I go into my tenant here, and if I just look at security posture, this is telling me largely, per my environments, and I've got AWS in here and GCP and Azure. And if I look at the recommendations for Azure, for example, it will tell me based on point scores. So if I sort by the point scores, top to bottom here, it will say in this case, hey, the biggest thing that you could do is enable MFA, right? This is just CSPM. This isn't contextual, okay? I'm building this like a house, okay? So if you enabled MFA here, it would give you 17 points. MFA is the biggest bang for your buck in this environment, given your configuration. And if I drop this down, it will tell me additional things like I should enable it on accounts with owner permission on the subscription. And if I click into that, it will tell me which within the subscription, who the people are that need MFA, who don't have it today. Okay, so that's just CSPM. When we get into the cloud security posture, the contextual CSPM, I'm not thinking in terms of remediating vulnerabilities. Instead, it's almost, in this case, it's more of like an investigation. Okay, so, and I don't mean like a SIM investigation. I mean like just hunting around. Let's hunt together. Okay, so you'll notice here is that we start with some templates and we provide these just kind of as starting points. So, like, do I have any OpenSSL v3 pods? Or do I have any Kubernetes that have weird things? Or user accounts without MFA and permissions on storage accounts? Let's just open this one, right? So if I open this query, let it open. won't open for me. What am I doing wrong? Oh, there it is. Sorry. So accounts where, let me do it again. So if I said user accounts with MFA, so I clicked on it, and this is the query that it's going to run. And if I said, essentially what I'm asking for, what was it? User accounts without MFA and with permissions to storage accounts. Search. And I've got a bunch of them actually. So these user accounts, and by the way, I'd have to look up what these IDs are. These could be service accounts as well. Each have permissions, don't have MFA enabled, and they have permissions on these storage accounts. Okay, let's just but here's something I'm not good at stringing these together, but let me show you one that I was playing with yesterday and see if you think that this is cool. So I don't know if many of you probably know this, but on the internet there are things called common vulnerabilities, CVEs, and what these vulnerabilities are things that are known to the world, and what they give them is a number. Okay, so like you can track them. So one of the things that I started looking into is like, well, let's just hunt based on CVE IDs. Okay, so like here, if I say select, and if I look at vulnerabilities, notice I can start with anything as a pivot point. This is almost like a pivot table in Excel. So I could start with network interfaces, logic apps, I could load balancers, key vaults. But if I just started from the position of vulnerabilities, and I said plus, and I said where the CVE ID starts with, and I don't know if you know this, but all CVEs start with the letter CVE and then a dash and the year in which they were initiated. Okay, so CVE-2022 would be all the ones that came out this year. So let's look at that. Anything that's new, CVE-2022. And why did this do this? I want to clear all. Hold on, I want to clear this. I don't know why it started with that. So vulnerabilities, where, now this is better. CVE starts with CVE-2022, search. And what I come back with is all of the CVEs that have come out this year, okay? Now this is the thing, I was literally just mucking with this on the couch because I thought I had a little revelation. I'm like, I wonder how old some of the CVEs are in my demo tenant, because this has been up for a long time, like 7 or 8 years. So I started climbing backwards in years. So let's just go back a few. Let's go to 2018. Do I have any CVEs from 2018 in my environment? Search. Yeah, I've got a bunch, as a matter of fact, which I thought was interesting. And I'm like, how bad does it get? And I'm like, 17? Yeah. 16? Do we have some that are 6 years old in this environment? Yeah. And I was like, how bad can this be? And I literally started climbing backwards. I'm like, we got stuff from 2015. I was like, no, it can't be 2014. And you can keep going. And the thing is that some of these you realize are just not being patched. And like, could it be? Yeah. And you're like, it's seriously, how bad can this be? And you'll see like some low severity stuff, but these servers like this open, whatever it is, MRVMQ001, it's like, well, what is going on here? Right. And so what I could do is I could say, well, like, let's just tell me about this machine. And I can drill. What I did is I said, I went to that machine and I looked and I'm like, maybe we should update it. And so I just started using some of these machines, because you can see it's only a few machines that are really bad in this environment. If I showed you the kind of the results, I think it's 3 or 4 machines. And so what I could do is I could start pivoting on the machine instead of be like, show me the virtual machine where it has, just show me the virtual machine, and it would show me all the CVEs associated with that. But I could hunt and query through this all day long. Okay, so this is the Cloud Security Explorer, which just like lets you take a query-based approach to figuring out like what's going on in my environment. You could also start from like recommendations, like show me all the places where I have storage issues. Show me all the places where I have network issues. And then you could just say, hey, dump that as a report and then send it to somebody. Be like, hey, storage guy, go fix this stuff. Now, you could probably do this in Qualys and Rapid7 as well. But the idea is that this is all stitched together. It's it's servers, switches, router, storage, on-prem, in the cloud, identities, everything that we can see, everything. So this is part one. Part two is something called attack path analysis. And so if I look, actually, I'm going to get out of this one. I'm going to go into a different machine. By the way, Patrick, Grady, has anybody, if you guys have questions, type those in, okay?
And Paul, maybe we'll just say, so on the upper bar, there's a Q&A button that you can click, and that's the best place to put your questions.
Yeah. Thank you. So this is something called attack path analysis. So what is this about? So attack path analysis lets me say, given the how my environment is configured, what nasty things am I susceptible to? And so this is an evergreen solution. As new attack vectors come out, new CVEs, new vulnerabilities, this is going to take a pivot of saying, based on the stuff that you have exposed on the internet, for example, here's how somebody could leverage a vulnerability in your stuff to get to things like data or keys or whatever. So if you look here, like I've got 6 attack paths here on an internet exposed VM has high severity vulnerabilities. If I looked at one, let's just climb into that one for a second. I don't know what I'm going to get. I did not pre-screen these. But if you notice this, like I've got this VNet, which routes traffic to this subnet and this IP address, which gets you to this virtual machine. So if somebody could exploit that, it might be nasty. Let's just say, let's look at this. An internet exposed Kubernetes pod is running a container with high severity vulnerabilities. And sometimes what you'll find, and if we drill into these, you'll see like, here's a cluster that contains this namespace that's in this egress point, et cetera, et cetera. And so you'll notice it tells you exactly how to get there. Some of these diagrams are really hairballs. I was wondering if we would see any of these that are really hairball-y. That one is not too bad. I kind of want to, let's blow this out. Yeah. So, you can actually see how some of them, they can get like they'll fork into different directions. It's like you've got this Kubernetes thing that's connected to this storage that's where somebody could use this container and this vulnerability to get to your storage account, or they're using this identity has read access to this key vault. And if you blew up this, somebody managed to get access to that user account, they would have access to all your keys, right? That kind of stuff is the things that you would see here. And I was hoping that there would be something a little more rich in here than this, and there is not. Let me look at my other tenant here. Because I did bring it up. I just wasn't sure what I was going to see. So that's the same thing here. I've got a few different tenants that kind of show you different things that like different ways to demo this. But I hope you get the point. Okay, don't lose sight of the point. This service is constantly going to be evaluating your environment to look for vulnerabilities that expose you on the internet to attackers. And if it finds something new, it will show you how that exposure could be leveraged. That's what I want you to take away from attack path analysis. Okay, so on that, let's move to something called ESM, or External Attack Surface Management. Now, the attack path analysis and ESM feel very similar, except the charter of ESM is a little bit larger. Okay, so what is ESM? Let's go in here. External Attack Surface Management. So if I do type, ESM, E-A-S-M, right here, you'll see something called Microsoft Defender External Attack Surface Management. And I created you basically point this at your things. So what External Attack Surface Management does is you initially, when you set it up, you say, here are all of my public URLs. Here are the IP ranges that I own, etc. Here's the names of the, like, Microsoft.com or your company name .net or whatever, right? you configure it with all of that stuff. And what it will do is tell you everything that it's aware of. So it'll say like, here's your attack surface priorities, similar to what you saw in attack surface management. Here's your high, medium, low severities. If you had key usage, like if I look here, let's see if I have, sorry, I'm going to poke and prod here. If you had keys, yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Paul, we did have one question come in.
Yeah.
And the question was, is any of this related, correlated, or presented as part of the Defender exposure score?
Defender exposure score. Are you talking about secure score? There is no such thing as Defender exposure score. Secure score, at least I'm not, maybe I'm missing it. I don't know. So yes, it would be shown to you in your secure score as things you should be fixing. But that is part of that CSPM stuff. I'm tempted to go backwards now because I feel like
exposure score is related to endpoint management and vulnerability. So when we look at that, it'll feed back into the graph, Glenn. When we look at that, we'll be able to see it through the secure score, all up.
Yeah, what Grady said then. Yeah, yeah. So I'll just say like, okay, yeah. I'll move on. Yeah, so maybe we can take that one offline. So what EASM? So let me reframe EASM a little bit. So if you're familiar with, there are two services out there like called BitSite and UpGuard. If you're using those services, EASM will feel very similar to you. So what it's doing is it's telling you, what EASM is telling you is, given what you have exposed on the internet, here is all the things that we see, and here is all the things that we think might create some issue for you. Now, like in the case of attack path analysis, like it doesn't care if you've got a certificate that's about to expire on one of your web hosts. Okay, that would just be like, I lost my SSL. That's not an attack path. EASM would say that matters. As a part of your overall footprint on the internet, you have a certificate that's about to expire, for example, right? Or you have like a DNS record out there that could be used in a way that isn't configured properly, or something out there. So the EASM environment will tell you all of the things that it sees on the internet, as opposed to the secure scores that you see for us largely are focused on what's behind the firewall on the back. Think of what we would think of as backnet. Okay, so most of the recommendations that we make in our other security tooling is like looking at you from the inside out. EASM is looking at you from the outside, almost like any other nation state would see you. They don't have access to the back end stuff, and not unless they attack you. What they have access to is things like your front end ports, your IP addresses, your web servers, whatever's running on those ports and protocols. So EASM will tell you, like, for example, if you've got OWASP things that you are susceptible to, and I don't see any here, but like if you were susceptible to SQL injection, it would show you what asset is susceptible to SQL injection. If you had like a cryptographic failure, like an SSL problem or something, it would say like, hey, you've got to go fix this. Okay. So once again, EASM is, if you're familiar with BitSite and UpGuard, very similar. Okay, the only difference is we're not doing a vendor reputational risk score like BitSite or UpGuard. So what BitSite and UpGuard would use, what they would do is compare you to your peers and be like, you're less secure than so-and-so over here. We're not doing that. We're just showing you. Okay, we're not comparing you to anybody else. Okay. So that's what EASM is all about. Let me go back to my PowerPoint for a second. next one I wanted to show you is a little bit of DevOps. Okay, so this one was recently added, and if you go into Defender for Cloud, you will notice a new thing called DevOps security. So what is this all about? This is the scanning of your source code repositories to see if there's any vulnerability in your source code. Okay, so the way that you set this up is to go into in Defender for Cloud, you go into environment settings and you add an environment, and you notice that you can point it at GitHub or Azure DevOps. So if you're using something like GitLab today, this does not work with GitLab. It only works with GitHub and Azure DevOps today. Okay, so what you would do is say, like, if I want to add another GitHub repo, you give your connection a name, and we could just say, like, you know, CISO Summit connection, right? And you put this into a resource group, and today it only runs in Central US. It's just where the scanning is taking place from. Okay, and then you would basically connect it through these other ones to your GitHub repos. Basically, you log into your GitHub account, and what it will do is it will scour those repos for vulnerabilities. Now, if you have public repos, you can use this to scan those, no problem. If you have private repos, you have to have something called GitHub Advanced Security deployed on GitHub. Okay, so for public repos, we can scan them without any GitHub tooling. If you have private repos, you need to have some tooling in your repo in order for us to be able to pull the data out of it, because it's private. So essentially, we're talking through that agent, if you will, to get access to your repo. I hope that makes sense. So now when we go out here, what you will see is within DevOps, and by the way, boring, because like I actually had one of my buddies, I'm like, hey, could you, I don't write code. So I had one of my dev people, I'm like, can I point at your repo? And he's like, just fork mine. So I forked his into my repo, and he didn't have any vulnerabilities in his. I'm like, boo, could you put some badness in there so I have something to show? We did this at 7 o'clock last night, so it's another one of my faults. But like, the point here is that, you know, it will start to tell you if you have things like connection strings in the clear, or like log4j is a great example. Like I took the log4j code and I forked it into my code, and now log4j is vulnerable, so I'm vulnerable. So this will tell you those kind of things. If you have insecure code, if you've got connection strings in the clear, if you fork something malicious, etc. So if you are a code security junkie, you will know that there are two different types of code security tools out there. One is called SAST, S-A-S-T, and the other one is called DAST, D-A-S-T. Static Assessment Security Tool, I think is the acronym, and Dynamic Assessment Security Tool. Today, this is SAST, okay? So it is not doing things like fuzz testing or like any of these things where it tries to break your code through a bunch of like just randomness. It's literally looking at rules today, SAST, not DAST, okay? So I'm hopeful at some point in the future, we will take the learnings from Morse, that thing I mentioned earlier, and we will build more fuzz testing DAST capabilities into DevOps security as well. So, and once again, if I looked at if there were any vulnerabilities, which there are none, yeah, I would be able to click in those and it would tell me where they are. Okay. Back to PowerPoint for a second. I hope that makes sense. Once again, we can talk to Azure DevOps, ADO, or GitHub today. Let's go back to PowerPoint for a second. The other thing I want to talk through is Defender for serverless agents, Defender for servers agentless scanning. So if I go back to Defender for Cloud and I go to inventory today,
real quick, we've got one question on DevOps workflow.
Sure.
They're asking, would code scan be part of the process? So when you say code scan part of the process with GitHub or Azure DevOps, we can actually scan for things like, secrets, phrases, those sort of things for unsecure code when the developers are doing things like commits and pulls. I don't know if that's the workflow that you're talking about, Tom.
No, we don't. With it here, that's not happening. Here, it's whenever it's in the repository. We have other things we have so much in our tooling, and this is just the new stuff. I didn't talk through everything that we can do.
Right.
So if you wanted to like scan on like in a CI/CD pipeline, when you were going to publish source code, right? You compiled and it worked, and then you're going to publish it through a CI/CD pipeline. There's also mechanisms within GitHub, for example, and Azure DevOps to scan the code then. This scanning but let's just say, for example, you go into GitHub and you fork a source code repository into your own environment. You never did any CI/CD, okay? So what this is doing is it's looking at your repos and it's scanning them periodically, okay? So we have both. I can scan when you go to publish through a CI/CD pipeline, but that is done through other tooling, not this. It's done through GitHub Advanced Security, for example, and some of the stuff that they do. And Azure DevOps has the equivalent. It used to be called AZSK. Anyways, but like there is tooling that we have where it will scan in an Azure DevOps CI/CD pipeline as well as a GitHub pipeline. But that is not this. This is just scanning the repo. Got both. I hope that makes sense.
Answers your question.
If not,
then one other one, skipping around a little bit, but we're trying to get some questions. Would EASM detect or notify of typo squatted domains? Near spelling.
Typo squatted. So that is, yes, although not in the EASM. Boy, that I kind of want to unpack that. So like typo squatted domains. So what does that mean? Let's just say in Microsoft, it's MICRO, right? A typo domain, like a typo domain would be M1CRO, for example, or instead of an O, it would be a 0, right? So you're just trying to visually fake out your users so they approve, like do something that they normally wouldn't do because you send them to a domain name that looks like it's close. Yep. So what, as a part of our acquisition of Risk IQ, okay, what they are doing, but not as a part of EASM, what happens is when you have a thing occur, there is like somebody does a squatted domain with, a typo squatted domain. Risk IQ has a different portal, and it's actually here. I was thinking of showing it to you, but it wasn't related to any announcements that we had made. But it's right here. There is a service that you run through that you acquire. I'll just stop there. And what it will do is it will tell you whenever one of those is registered. We surface this same data inside of Sentinel. So what happens when you get an incident, what we do is we send the entity information over to the Risk IQ service. And what it does is it pulls back all of the related entity material. So let's just say that in this example, the entity that was being attacked was Microsoft.com. When it sends it to Risk IQ, it'll be like, oh, did you know that there's a typo squatted domain out there called M1CRO soft.com? And you'd be like, oh, well, that's interesting. And maybe what we should do is sinkhole that so that it can't, nothing, like we turn on a firewall rule or like a WAF rule, for example, that would say ignore that domain, or we would tell our endpoints to not be able to go that domain, like sinkhole that domain. You can absolutely do that, but that is not a part of EASM. It's a part of this Defender for Threat Intelligence service, as well as what's baked into Sentinel, as well, and that's going to be also baked into security.microsoft.com. So we're going to expose the data for you, but if you just wanted to like constantly pay attention to certain resources, this Defender for TI service will do that for you.
We'll call
Okay.
that a near Ignite announcement because that one's fairly recent, everyone.
It is, but the integration into Sentinel has been there for a few months. But the Risk IQ service has been available forever. This is what they do for a living. When we acquired them a year and a half, like back in last July, a year ago, that was one of their services that you could have them watch certain things and they would tell you what's going on. Really what you're seeing in this EASM and attack path analysis is the integration of Risk IQ into our platform. That's really what you're seeing. So EASM, attack path analysis, this Defender for Threat Intelligence thing is all a part of that. So like here, and I just show you what this looks like. So if I search for a Novelium, for example, right? Here, it would actually show me, and if I'm not going to drill into this, but there are 523 indicators. It would show me all the hash values, the URLs that they use, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is APT29 Cozy Bear. This is Russia. Okay, so like, but this is the service of this Microsoft Defender for TI, Defender for TI, and it used to be Risk IQ. Boy, that took a while to unpack. But I always want to give the complete answer, not like, yeah, we got it.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, I forgot where we were. So we were on I think we were on, let me go back. So Defender for agentless scanning. Okay, Defender for servers, agentless scanning. Let's talk about it for a sec. Because showing it to you is like, it's no different than showing you a physical server that I'm scanning. So what we announced is that today, if we wanted to scan your server for like vulnerabilities, okay, we had to have an agent, the Defender for Endpoint agent, which was delivered by something called Azure Arc. So we would load that agent on your machine. It would scan for vulnerabilities, Linux and server stuff, or Windows Server stuff, right? Problem was, many customers said, I don't want to load your agent on my machine, but I still want to know what vulnerabilities it's susceptible to. So what we enabled is the ability to deploy this this agentless scanning capability. And basically the way that the agentless scanning works is we take a snapshot of the virtual machine and we scan the snapshot basically like a file. We open up the VM and we scan it. Today we can do this in AWS and Azure. Soon we will be able to do it in GCP. We can also do it for Kubernetes, which is kind of fun. And I can basically scan those images and look for vulnerabilities without loading an agent on them. So the way that you do this, though, is if you go into here, we go into environment settings, and you choose where you want to load it. And in this case, I think it's at the subscription level, and we go to maybe later here under Defender CSPM or servers here. If I go into settings or this, you will see agentless scanning for machines in preview, and you can turn it on. And you can also edit the configuration here where you can give it just tags and things that you want to look for, but it's pretty simple, right? Turn it on. So now any machines that you point it at, it will scan for vulnerabilities in an agentless way. And you can do this, like I said, I believe you can do it on the AWS one as well and not GCP. So if I could try that, but like, just trust me, I think it's right. So I'm pretty sure Defender CSPM servers, settings, Azure Arc, agentless scanning on off. Yep. Not for GCP. Okay. So it works. At some point in GCP, we will do it. By the way, there's a lot of things that we're actually doing behind the scenes to pull this off. Okay. So it's not it may seem simple. Like, why can't you just do it everywhere? We're actually using the APIs from those cloud platforms to be able to deliver this. So we're building like a scratch space, like a storage space. We are taking the VM and then we're running like a little agentless thing against that the file of the VM to scan it, et cetera. So it takes a little bit of API work. So eventually we'll have it for all of them. Today it's just AWS and Azure. Okay, or yeah. Okay.
Is that authentication scans or not? Does it include authentication scans?
What do you
That's a
mean?
question from
What
the
do you mean? What do you
from the
mean?
gallery.
I don't know what that means. You mean like I don't know what an authentication scan is.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing, honestly. So if you could give us a little bit more context there, we'd appreciate it, and we'll try and get it answered for you.
Yeah, and I may know the answer, and I may not. So, cool. Let's go back here. So that's what agentless scanning allows me to do. And then it basically, it just shows up as, vulnerabilities and recommendations and things that it thinks you should fix. Okay. So we're done with the Defender one, on to the Entra one. And so Entra, what is Entra? For those of you not familiar, because we do this to you for a living, let's change the name of things and freak people out and blah, blah, blah. Inside of Microsoft, I feel like we've almost, we should have a drinking game where we just have like a row of alcohol, and whenever we change the name for something, we all have to do a shot, because I think we'd be drunk pretty frequently. We do tend to change the names of things a lot. Entra is the name now for all things related to identity. So if you hear about things like Azure Active Directory, Entra is now a part of, or Azure Active Directory is a part of Entra. Permissions management is a part of Entra. Decentralized identity is a part of Entra. Things like cross-tenant access policies, once again, a part of Entra. So and you may not know what so I just talked about permissions management and XTAP and things like decentralized identity. I'm not going to describe those, I'm sorry. But what I will say is that as you can get to the Entra portal through entra.microsoft.com, and it will give you access to all of these things through one URL. But it's not a deprecation of Azure Active Directory. It's not like we're eliminating things. All we're doing is trying to put it all under one brand, so that what is, if it's related to identity, it is an Entra product. Okay, that's it. There is strategy there to bring all these things together more gracefully too, like decentralized identity and the permissions management, which we acquired through a company called Cloud Knox. All of that is becoming more gracefully integrated over time as well. So just think of it as a name today, okay? So the three big things that we announced are identity governance, automated workflows. So the first thing is what the heck is identity governance? So what identity governance inside of Azure Active Directory allows me to do is it allows me to take a package of resources. Okay, what do I mean by a package of resources? Things like websites, internal websites that you've got on your backnet, or SaaS applications like Twitter or Workday or Salesforce.com or something, or Teams sites. Okay, like within Microsoft Teams sites, SharePoint sites, okay, or groups of users, group memberships. And what you want to do is take that, like a section of those, put them together in a package, and I'm going to be like, hey, Grady, you manage this group of marketing stuff. Patrick, you manage all the HR stuff. Now, even though I'm giving the ability for Grady to manage marketing resources like the marketing sites, and what I'm still doing is I'm putting the blast radius around Grady, so that even though he can add users and remove users and onboard people, offboard people, he can only do it in a way that I allow. Okay, so I can be like, yeah, Grady, I will let you add people to this marketing group, but when you add them to the marketing group, they can only be members. They can't be owners of that group. And when you add them to this team site, they can only be contributors. They can't be owners of the team site. When you add them to the SharePoint site, they can be visitors, but they can't be contributors. Okay, and if you add permissions on your internal websites, it can be, they can access those, but they can't access, they can't be an owner of that either, right? So you can grant them granular access. Now, when I talk about giving access to internal applications, this works in conjunction with something called app proxy, so that you don't have to give them a VPN to access it. So now I can give them one bubble of things. And I can say, Grady, you manage all the marketing stuff. And Grady's like, excellent. I'm going to invite some of our business partners into this. And I'm like, it's all yours to manage. I just put up the blast radius around what they can do. Now Grady can bring B2B people in. They don't have to VPN to get into his environment. They can use app proxy to access the internal stuff. They can go right to the SaaS applications for the stuff like that. They can access Teams and SharePoint and things like that. But they can only do what I've given Grady the ability to do. And they can't climb out of that bubble, which is the really important thing. So identity governance for B2B is like magical, because if you don't use identity governance, once a B2B object is in your tenant, they can go wherever the heck they want. Like literally, somebody can make them a global administrator of your tenant if you're not careful. With identity governance and some other settings, I can literally keep the B2B person in a bubble. Okay, so I had to give you that background, because otherwise you'd be like, well, what do I care about identity governance? But that's the goal of what it does, okay? What automated workflows allow me to do is think when I have like a new employee starting, I can actually say, here's a workflow that I want it to go through. Okay, like send them a welcome email, put them in these groups, kick off a process, like some logic app or some automation, do this, and it will run through that like a script. So what you do to do this is you go into, we can go into Entra, or I could go to Azure Active Directory. Let's just go to Azure Active Directory. And what we'll do is we go to, actually, let me go to Entra just so I can show it to you, because it looks, you'll notice they look similar. So we'll just go to Entra. So here's Azure Active Directory. And what I can do is under the Identity Governance tab, I can say like, we'll do lifecycle workflows. And you'll notice here when I go to create a workflow, it has all these templates that you can start from. Like onboarding a pre-hire, onboarding a new hire employee. Like, so this is before we've even hired him, right? So, or like, so, you know, this is the things that I should say before his first day, and then maybe on their first day. So, right. So, you know, you can start from here. And if you look at the details of it, it will tell you what it does. And we can select the template. But it will be, well, let's just create one from scratch though, so you can see what it looks like. So I'm trying to, yeah, we'll just create a workflow. And we could start from a template, or I could just start generically. Let's start from this one. I'll say we're going to do onboard new hire employee. So this is day one work. So we'll select it. And we can leave the name alone. We can just onboard new hire employee, give it a description. And what are the triggers? Okay, so like, and this is 0 day, but if I wanted to, I could change it and be like, no, on day 1 or 3 or whatever, after he starts. So let's go to configure the scope. And what we can do is build a rule that says, well, if you're a marketing person, I'm going to do this for you. If you're an HR person, I'll do that. If you're a technical person, I'll send you something else, because maybe you've got a bunch of training you want them to do that is specific to their role, right? So what I could do is like say, if the department equals marketing, I could start from that. Then we'll add an expression. I could say, and like the employee's given name starts with Paul, what's it, Grady or Patrick, whatever. And I could say, or the given name starts with, you know, whatever, or the display name or the country equals United States, right? If they do this, let's just say, we'll just do US, right? And then next, and we would review tasks here. Now we've got to add a task. And in this case, I could turn on the account. I could kick off a logic app. By the way, with a logic app, I can do whatever I want. Okay, so if I go to add like things here, like run a custom task execution, like here, you'll notice I can add users to groups. I can remove them from groups. I can send an email, et cetera, et cetera. But if I run a custom task, I could do something like say, create a ticket in ServiceNow. I want to give the guy a phone number. I'm gonna have to make a query for that against our phone system. I need to notify their manager that they're getting this training starting today. I need to, et cetera, et cetera. I could do all that with a logic app without writing any code. So a little too much for today's discussion, but just know that it's out there. These logic apps, and by the way, if you've heard the word Power Automate or logic app, they feel exactly the same. They're twins of each other, darn near identical in their functionality. They're just meant for different audiences of people. So logic apps are made by people who manage infrastructure. Power automates are for people who are doing citizen development or developers. Okay, but you can the same functionality. Okay, so the point here is that now once I've done that, I could send an email, I could add them to groups, I could kick off a workflow, a logic app, et cetera, and now it will just run. So when a new hire starts, his first name starts with Grady. He's in this country. He's a part of marketing. He's going to get this workflow. Okay, so that's what these life cycle. This is the new thing we added was these life cycle workflows. They're fun. All this is cloud, right? So we'll keep adding functionality to this. I think you'll see this get, more rich over time, but it's a good start. Paul's opinion. Your mileage may vary. Conditional access auth strength. Okay, so like, what is this about? Today, I could, if somebody was authenticating in something called conditional access, I could say do an MFA. But I couldn't specify the type of MFA. It would just kind of do whatever the user had configured. But let's just say that the user configured SMS for their MFA and they configured Microsoft Authenticator and they also did a phone call. Okay, so those are the three options that they configured, or we allowed them to configure or configured for them. And let's just say the user chose SMS, but they happened to be in Hong Kong this week. You know what happened? Hong Kong, because it's in China, they own the telephone system. They also own all of the infrastructure, the Great Firewall of China, in other words. They could scrape those creds and the SMS message. Now they've got the creds and the token. I'll let that sink in for a second. So in what you may want to do is say, if the user's in the United States, they can use SMS. If they're in some place like China or Russia, I only want them to authenticate with their authenticator app. Okay, so that's what we mean by auth strength, is given a scenario, you may want to choose which authentication method is the best given the scenario. SMS is a terrible second form of MFA, by the way. Leaky, like I can take the SIM out of your phone, just steal it from you, and now I get all of your SMS messages. I can also go into almost any AT&T store and say that I am you, and if I have a weak, driver's license, they won't give it a second thought. They'll give me your SIM. It's the easiest thing to hijack. It is by far the least. Anyway, so let's get into this. So how do I configure it? I'm just, by the way, it's a pet peeve of mine that people are like, oh, we use SMS for authentication. I'm like, stop it. Terrible. It's a terrible, it's almost as bad as using a pin that I could give somebody. It's almost as bad. Okay. So, so the way that you do this is you go into, from Azure, let's see, I got to find a portal here. Defender, here we go. So I'm going to go into conditional access right here. And if you pick any of these policies, I got this MAT-H demo policy, the one that I use a lot of. If you look under granting controls here, I have granting controls selected. Now, you will notice it says require MFA. Okay, I can't do both. Okay, so in this one, I basically shotgun it and say, I don't care what MFA it is, pick whatever you want. So I can't choose this one if this one is chosen. If I uncheck this, I can choose authentication strength. And now I get to pick one of three methods. Okay, so FIDO2 key, passwordless multi-factor authentication, or multi-factor including SMS. So these are the strength things that we're talking about. So you could say, like, if the condition, let's just go backwards here. I'm not going to save that. But if I said the location equals, and I would say, like, I could add another any location. I could say, like, if it's Russia, okay, or China or something like that. I'll choose a different one. If it's China, I would say then, and I'll take out US. So I might create a policy that says, if it's China, then under the granting controls, I will not require MFA. I want strong MFA. And what I would say is, it's got to be phishing resistant. Or it's got to be passwordless with the Authenticator app. Select, and now I've built a rule that's more secure for somebody who's in China. I am not going to save that because I demo off of that all the time. I hope that makes sense though. All right, so back to deck here. We got one last thing. Certificate-based authentication. So quick Paul side anecdote. I was getting beat up by some federal customers, government customers recently who are like, you people suck. We have a lot of smart cards in our Fed group and we need to be able to do smart cards. And I'm like, I'm sorry, we don't have a solution for you in Azure yet. CBA is what allows that to happen. So if you guys are a smart card based authentication group of people, you can now use smart cards and you can do it on a user by user basis, much like you can do anything regarding passwordless on a user by user or a group by group basis. So I would argue if you're not doing passwordless for at least for your admins, what are you waiting for? Please do that. It's like it kills off 90% of the attack vectors. 90 is probably a strong number, but a big chunk, maybe 60% of the attack vectors that people can do if you enable MFA for administrators. And if you enabled MFA for your users, it's also one of the bigger things that you can just work on it. And your users will love you, by the way, for doing it. We never change passwords. I don't rotate my password anymore at Microsoft. The only people who have to rotate passwords are people who have that have to attest to PCI, because PCI hasn't figured out yet that password rotation is a terrible thing. So we're working with those organizations. But anyways, certificate-based authentication, the way that you set it up. Sorry, I get off on these tangents, and I sometimes you have to say, Paul, slow down, buddy. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to, let's go back to Azure Active Directory here first. I'm going to go to the regular one for a second. So we'll go to portal.azure.com. I could have done it here too, but I didn't want to. We'll go to Azure Active Directory. If you scroll down to security here, you will see authentication methods. This is how you turn on MFA for groups of users. So you'll notice here we've got FIDO2 keys, which are like UB keys, if you've ever seen those, the little FIDO2 keys like UB keys. I could say I've got 50 people who carry UB keys, and I could say those. I could assign people to Authenticator. I could assign them to SMS. Temporary access pass, by the way, is really powerful. This especially for new hires. Microsoft people do not need to know passwords. Like, we have been out of the password game for a long time. So, but what about the new hire employee that just starts on day one? What we do is we give them a passcode that they can use one time only, and they use it to set up all their other credentials. So that's this one. And then certificate-based authentication. And what you would do is you would say, yes, I'm going to enable it. And it would say, for which users need these certificates? And I would choose a group, and I'll just say like Chicago. I've got some Chicago users here. All the people in Chicago. And then under the configuration, you set up the things that you need to do for your smart cards, okay, for your certificate-based auth. And you can add rules here. There's things in here that you can add, et cetera, et cetera. But you set these up, you fill out this page, and now you can do smart card authentication for a subset of users. Boom, done. Okay, that's what this was all about. By the way, I just got to show you this because it's so much fun. So if you said like, I'm going to give Matt Hink, this guy, the ability to have a one-time passcode. Now, Matt, let's just say Matt's a new hire employee. What I can do is I can go back here to Azure Active Directory, go to the user. Let's just search for Matt. I got to show you this one because it's almost like this is one of the, it's just so cool. So like now I could say down under authentication methods for Matt, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an authentication method called temporary access pass. So basically in the first step, what I did is say Matt is entitled to have one. Now what I'm saying is I'm going to give one to Matt, okay? So what I do is I would say, is it delayed start? Like, when does Matt need it? Maybe he's a new hire, but he doesn't start till tomorrow. So I could set it up for tomorrow. I can say how many hours, and I could be like, Matt can use this code for 8 hours, one time only. Or if it says no time, he can log in all day long on day one with this code. Okay, so now I would say add. what it does is it spits out his temporary access code. That's his login. Now, Matt can log in using this. And then what you would do is send him to this URL and he could register all of his other credentials. So his phone, his SMS, his authenticator app. And that is the last time Matt needs to know this password. He is done with passwords. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to kill that, by the way, so that all you people who are trying to hack that right now can't do it. So you had your chance to hack Matt Hink. I'm sorry, you blew it. So, but that's the way it works, is you set up a temporary access pass for Matt. He can use it one time or all day long, and then it goes away. So anyways, this is how that works. I hope that that was useful. I know that that wasn't really a part of what we announced, but it's so powerful. I just wanted to talk about it. All right. So that's these three things: identity governance, automated workflows, auth strength, certificate-based authentication. Intune, nothing to demo on these. So I'm just going to talk through these as it'll go quick. On this one, the first thing that we have, which is really fun, I'm not making this up. I had this question asked of me 2 weeks ago. Like, what about, so like we have, we've said like at Microsoft, we let people be local administrators of their machines. So on this machine that I'm at as a Microsoft employee, I am a local admin, okay? In many companies, though, they don't want to do that, but they inevitably say, but there are scenarios where I need them to be a local admin. So now with Intune, I can kick those users up to be a local admin for one time, just for one task. And what happens is in the application, if you need it, it says elevate permissions and it sends a request to Intune. In Intune, I grant it, and then you can be an administrator one time to do something. Kind of fun. So that's coming. I would say hopefully wintertime. Okay, back to Intune. What I mean by this is you will notice in our marketing, this is a drinking game, remember, we went to something called Endpoint Manager, and we had Intune Endpoint Manager and then System Center Endpoint Manager, which was just ridiculous. They decided that we were going to change this all back to just Intune, okay? So it's going to be Microsoft Configuration Manager and Intune. No more of this Endpoint Manager nomenclature stuff. It was just confusing our users. So we decided to change the name. I know it's not really it's not a technology thing, but some of you are like, okay, thank you, whatever. So tunnel Intune for Intune MAM. Okay, so what is this? We have this thing called mobile application management. So let me talk about the problem statement first. We have plenty of companies out there where the employee needs access to company resources, but they will not, or they don't want the company to manage their phone. That is called MDM, mobile device management. Okay, they don't want the device to be managed. They just want access to the applications. And it's like, well, I'm in a chicken and an egg problem. If I can manage you, I can put all the security stuff on your phone to make sure that it can't be breached, or by the way, this could be a PC or a phone or a tablet, whatever. But like, I have this BYOD thing and I want to give you access to applications, but you culturally don't want me managing your device. With MAM, I can do that. Okay, so basically what it means is it's almost like a container, but it's not like a container. It feels like it though. So within these MAM applications, you basically are in a bubble. And that bubble means you can use the application, but it's got a certificate bound to it that only lets it be used by this persona. Okay, so like, for example, if you were in your Dropbox account and you had a company Dropbox and a personal box account, because I don't think Dropbox does corporate. Anyways, but like if you were a box account, you could be a corporate user or a personal user. If you were in corporate, you would have access to all the corporate resources. But if you changed context within the app and said, I want to drop into my personal one, you couldn't move data from corporate to personal. Okay. So there's basically a certificate that locks that in so that you can't move things between one and the other. So within MAM, we can do that. I can have you kind of have an application in a bubble. And what that bubble allows me to do is, in this case, poke a hole into your corporate network so that you have an app on the phone that is in a bubble and it can talk to a backnet resource with this almost like a VPN, but it's tunneled through Intune. And what it allows you to do is access your backnet resources without managing the device. But the benefit is if the employee gets terminated or for some reason you just want to just take away their access, all you do is wipe out the certificate and no longer the bubble goes away. You're not managing the device. Everything stays in that blast radius. You can't keep it. You can't leak things out of it. If you set it up this way, you can't leak things out of it, right? And they just stay in the bubble. But now you can talk to backnet resources. So that's kind of powerful. We've been able to do the MAM stuff for a long time, but it was always for SaaS-based applications, internet accessible. The tunnel for Intune MAM just means that now I can poke holes to your backnet through it as well. I think that's kind of fun. Purview. I've got lots to demo here, but I may just like talk through a few of them just to kind of like get through this quickly and then give us some time for Q&A. Patrick, Grady, how are we doing for questions? They were probably in the bathroom.
We're doing okay.
Doing
We've
good,
got
yeah.
Got a few around CyberArk EPM old manage engine from Adam. So I don't know if we want to dive into that or not from a capability perspective.
Well, let's, yeah, I could talk about some of the, yeah, we could talk about that, but maybe let's hold it off to the end and we'll come back to it. Unless there's anything that was around the CBA or the certificate-based authentication or the stuff I just talked about here.
No, I think we'll hold it to the end and then we've got a little bit of time here. So I think we'll hold what we've got till the end.
Yeah, and we got about 35 more minutes left, right?
Yep.
Quick time check. Okay, cool. So here's what we got left. This is the last slide, guys. So we're getting to the end point. I know it's been a whirlwind, so I apologize. Insider risk forensic evidence. What this means now. So in our stack. So what is Purview? First of all, Purview is all things data. Okay, so I would say I give ourselves a solid. So Purview is really powerful, but I give ourselves a solid B- on our integration strategy of Purview right now. I feel like there's some really good work to be done and it's happening and I know where we're going, but what you're going to start seeing is you're seeing some of it today, how many of these things are coming together under one umbrella. So what do I mean by that? Under the Purview umbrella, we're talking about structured data and unstructured data. So what do I mean? Like databases in Oracle databases on-premise or MySQL things in AWS or Google, right? As well as blob storage across any of those platforms. In other words, like just blob storage or file shares inside of any of those platforms. Or even on-premise, right? In addition to all the things in Office 365. Today we have kind of two tools, one that looks at like the blobs and the databases, and we have another one that looks for this unstructured data. Okay, they talk to each other, but like at some point you're going to start. I think you're going to see tighter and tighter and tighter integration between these two today. There was also a little bit of disconnect in the AIP scanner, which you see as item number 3 here, and I'll talk about that one. So just Purview, all up, think data. Okay, so when we're talking about data encryption, data protection, data labeling, data for audit, data for privacy, data for e-discovery, legal hold, information barriers, all of that is under the Purview brand. Okay, so one of the things that's in Purview is this idea of insider risk, which is, I'll give you an example. Let's just say that somebody gets pissed off, one of your employees gets mad, and they say, I am leaving this company, but before I do, I'm going to go to their competitor, and I'm going to take all of the sales data that I had for these customers over here, and I'm going to be a sales rep over for our competition, right? We created this insider risk tool because Microsoft people were leaving our company and going to our competitors and taking things with them. So we did this for ourselves first, and then we turned it into a tool for you. And what it will show you is all of the telemetry around what the user did to do whatever they tried to do. And there's a bunch of different models inside of insider risk that it will look for, like people leaking data accidentally, people doing it maliciously, people getting frustrated and then leaving a manager, even within the same company, like packaging up data as you move to a new role within a company. People who leave behind malicious bombs in the environment, like logic bombs, that I'm going to leave and then I'm going to run a script that deletes a bunch of files, right? Insider risk will look for all that for you. What the forensic evidence thing does is it will record the steps of what somebody is doing when they're doing these malicious activities now, so that you can actually see what they've done visually. Okay. So what you do to set this up is you go into the Defender or the Microsoft Purview portal, which is compliance.microsoft.com, and you go to Insider Risk, and here you will see a new tab called Forensic Evidence. Now, there a lot of effort is in Insider Risk to make sure that we're doing things that is done in an ethical way. Okay, so what happens when you set this up is that there is an approval process that people have to go through in order to be monitored. Okay, so you don't just turn this on against everybody. Okay, usually you would use it to turn on after somebody had done, like either well, this tool will look for the whole thing, but like with forensic evidence, it's almost like when you know that somebody is, let's just say, on a legal hold, okay, and you know that they're a part of something that's very sensitive that's going on. What you could do is turn on forensic evidence against them. And what it'll do, you can notify the user that they're under forensic evidence or whatever. But what happens here is that it will literally start watching that there is an agent that is loaded on the machine. It will start watching what's happening on the machine. And if they do something that is insider risk-ish, it will record those steps and it sends them back into this forensic evidence portal. I deployed it. This only became available to me last week, and I only started deploying it over the weekend. So I have not yet gotten a device to report up here. I haven't worked on it hard enough. So and so what you would see is that there's a client installation here, and you can do this through Intune. You could download this and run it through Intune or any other provisioning package or a group policy. You could just run it through that. And then what you can notify, you have a notification template telling the user that they're being monitored, for example. And so I said, hey, you're being monitored, and a user gets an email, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So the idea though is once I've turned it on, you will see like alerts and things that will bubble up in Insider Risk of things that occurred over a timeline. So once again, in this demo environment, I've got nobody acting maliciously. And so like, it's kind of like a tree in the forest. You need data. And there's like a scripted process that I can run periodically to make a user look like they're doing malicious Insider Risk stuff. I just haven't done it, but this is a really powerful tool. So you can, and it just looks at log files. As a matter of fact, it can look as far back as you have logs, and it will wind it all up forward, and it will show you people doing all kinds of interesting malicious stuff. So that's what forensic evidence does. Typically what we would have shown you is on a timeline what occurred. Okay, so when you have an alert, it would say, here's the timeline. It would say, and I'll show you a visual of that. So here, I'll show it to you in PowerPoint here for quickly. So if I look here, open, if I go to Insider Risk, for example, Insider Risk, this is what that looks like. So I'll bring this up real quick. Hold on, so you can see it. Hold on. So this is what it looks like in the portal. You would see things like, a user was using offensive language back here in May, and then the blue is he started copying some files, and then he printed things. That's the darker purplish right here. And then he emailed them to himself externally. And then what happened is he got terminated, right? And what you're able to stitch this together, even if you don't have the HR event. So this is talking to your HR systems as well, by the way, and your badging systems if you want it to. So when somebody badges into the building on a weekend and then they, and et cetera, it's tied in, it can be tied into those systems as well. Yeah, it's really powerful. Insider Risk is awesome, really is. It's an awesome tool. But anyways, that's how you set it up is, you set up the policy and you just kind of, and then you can turn on forensic audit if you want to, forensic evidence if you want to. Event trigger tuning. I'll just talk about this. Like, you can actually customize it. Before, you couldn't really customize the logic. The whole Insider Risk tool is based on machine learning. So in other words, it knows how Patrick does his job. And when Patrick starts deviating from a norm, it wakes up and is like, oh, Patrick is doing something weird. It also understands that whole concept of like, oh, well, I know the tool is watching me, so I won't download things en masse. What I'll do is I'll download one a month, right? It looks for that too. It can look for the slow trickle. It's been through millions of scenarios at this point with millions and millions of users. I mean, yeah, anyway, so it's seen a lot. So anyways, the event trigger tuning means that before you couldn't open up the ML, now you can actually tune it a little bit better. So you can say, I'll look for this, but not this. And what I care about is this, but not these things, right? And so the trigger tuning is just a way of us cracking open one of the machine learning things and saying, this is what it's just check boxes. So there's nothing much coding to do it there. DLP for Mac goes general availability. This was a big deal. So like on data loss prevention, we've had the ability to say like, hey, I don't want you to be able to print credit card numbers or put them on a thumb drive. So how do we do that, right? So if I go in here to the compliance portal, and I created a DLP policy, where is it? Data loss prevention. And I go to create a policy here. By the way, I know I'm skimming this. For those of you who have not seen these things before, I think we've recorded webcasts on some of this in the past. You might just have to go back and look at one of Patrick and Grady's sessions here. But like when you create a policy, and I'll say custom here, I know I'm going quickly. And you give it a name, and we'll call it test, because I'm not going to save it. And when we get here down to devices, so I could be like, if I was going to create a policy that only included devices here, one of the things that was a little frustrating is the logo, just Windows. Now, I thought we were going to see a Mac logo there. Whatever happened? Well, finally, it's in there. We just didn't change the logo. So if you go next here, you'll notice within devices, I can be like, I'm just going to monitor Grady's devices. I could do that, right? So on the devices though, what happens is I create a rule and I could say like, if the content that they're trying to download equals sensitive information type of credit card, by the way, you don't know what sensitive information types are either, but I'll explain those in a second. If I said, hey, if they try and do something with a credit card, what I'm going to do is on the actions, I'm going to restrict their activity on the devices. All right, here, audit or restrict activity on devices. Okay. So what I can then do is down up here, you'll notice I can say like, well, if you're going to try and download a copy of credit to a clipboard, I'm going to block it. No, you can't put it to clipboard. You can I'm going to block you from putting it on a USB, but I'll allow an override if you explain to me why. Copy to a network share, I'll allow. Print, no, block, right? And I could say, no, you can't copy it to Bluetooth. I'll block it to Bluetooth or even copy from RDP, right? So this was typical DLP stuff on Windows. The thing that we added is if you mouse over this, you'll notice this says Windows or Mac now. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that, the little thing. Whoop, darn it, what did I do? Oh, I was trying to do zoom in there. But anyways, it says Mac right there. Yeah. So works on Windows and Macs now too. So the point here is I can say like, hey, if your content contains something that you're trying to do on a Windows device, I could be like, no, you can't do that. Or tell me why you're doing it and I'll allow it to happen. But the ability to do it on a Mac was important. Okay. By the way, we can do it on Android and iOS. We just do it a different way. It's not an endpoint DLP thing. It is an MDM MAM thing. Okay, so we talked about MAM previously. I can do it through MDM policies. I can be like, you can't leave this bubble. Okay, so the AIP scanner moves into compliance portal. So before, why is this a big deal? One of the things that you'll notice in that portal that we're in. So if I cancel, go back, cancel. You notice here, when I created a policy, a DLP policy, so when I say create a policy and I say custom again and custom and I go next, we'll give it a name and I said test, right? Here, you'll notice the locations. But here, on-premise file repositories, right? I could point it at a repository and say, for this DLP policy, I care about these shares, right? Maybe you have one set of shares where you keep your CAD drawings, right? And you're like, that's an important share, okay? So this would tell it about which shares are a part of that policy. But the bigger question is like, how do I know what files are on that share? This is not looking in real time. We have as an agent, okay, that scans those shares and looks and sees what's on them currently. So if I cancel out of this now, we used to have to go to the Azure portal to set this up. Now it's here in settings. So if you go to the information protection scanner, what I can do is set up scan jobs against the various clusters of servers in your environment that are file share servers. And there's an agent that you have to load onto a VM, typically in your environment. That agent communicates out to the cloud. So there's no firewall rule that we require like from the outside in. It's just an agent talking out. But that agent will scan all the files in your file shares. This used to have to do this in Azure. This is what I mean. Like, I know it's a relatively small thing here, but today we have these multiple experiences where you're doing some stuff in Azure and you're doing other things in the compliance portal and you're going to this other purview web portal to do the databases. And what you're starting to see is us bringing all of that together. Okay. And so we're going to keep bringing it more and more together. So you have one throat to choke from a data perspective. Okay. Hope that makes sense. Back here. Bringing back the information toolbar. This is kind of this is classic. I don't think they would care if I told you this, but I took a year-long like internal sabbatical almost working on Accenture's identity and security team because I wanted to be able to have that 600,000 user scale under my belt. Because sometimes people would come in and be like, "Sonny, you don't understand. We're a big company. We got 20,000 employees," and I'd be like, "Yeah, okay." And so, anyways. Now I embedded myself in the security of a 600,000 person employee for a year as a Microsoft person. And so I've seen the havoc that they can create. Anyways, one of the things that Accenture did is they use Azure Information Protection a ton. They classified something like 670,000 documents a month inside of our platform. So they're a bigger user of Azure Information Protection than we were. And one of the things that they always loved was this idea of a toolbar that was in Windows. So like, and I'll bring up in Word, I should say, in Word. So if I go into Microsoft Word here, you will notice like here, there was a toolbar that ran, I know that that's really small. I just wrote the word test here. Okay, so just make it big. Okay, but like there used to be a toolbar right here where it would show me the confidentiality level of the document. And what Accenture told us is like when we took that away from our users, we dropped off our classifications by 40%. So people were doing a really good job of classifying the documents in Accenture, that 670,000 documents every month. But when they took away the toolbar, it dropped off by 40%. And so the thing that they said is, and this is where it went to the sensitivity button. It was off to the side, but there used to be a toolbar here. But when we moved their cheese, users stopped using it. So they're like, hey, we want to make this more front and center. So what we brought back was this. So now as soon as you save a document, you'll notice that this, and by the way, you can change these colors per the type of label. So general might be blue, public might be green, confidential might be red, or you can see these are yellow, right? But the idea there is that those colors, this graphical representation is a visual cue for your users like, hey, you should classify this stuff better, okay? So because otherwise it was buried in this button. I hope that makes sense. But it's kind of a big deal. So that you can do it from both. You could say like confidential Microsoft FTE only, or you could go up here to this visual cue and do the exact same thing. Okay. So that's what this is. New sets and trainable classifiers. Last thing that we have to discuss, and then we'll take the remaining time. I showed this to you a little bit when I did credit card. Okay. But if we go into the compliance portal here, you will notice, and we're in Purview, under data classification, when you are looking for things, so for those of you not familiar with data classification, if you're going to protect data, right, the very first thing that you have to negotiate with a tool is, what do you care about? Any tool. Doesn't matter what the tool is, right? So if you're going to tell it, you have to tell it what you care about. This data classification is a way for us to define what it is that you care about from a data perspective. So we have these 3 different ways to define it. Okay, we have trainable classifiers, sensitive information types, and exact data matches. That's what EDM stands for, exact data match. It's not electronic dance music. Okay, that's what I would prefer it to be, but that is not what this is. So exact data match. Sensitive information types and creatable classifiers. These are the out-of-the-box things that we provide you to say, like, here's like a ton of things that we'll look for, and you can add your own. So in a sensitive information type, you'll notice, I think that there's, I forget, 600, oh, 300, 308 items here. If you sort by the publisher, I think that there are 2, Contoso and 1 MTCQA. So of these, 306 are out of the box. And you'll notice that these things are looking for stuff like credit cards, bank routing numbers, driver's licenses, Australia tax ID file numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't have to tell us what a passport is. You don't have to tell us what a driver's license is. You don't have to tell us what a credit card is. We know how to look for those things. You can define your own by creating a sensitive information type. What we did, though, recently is we added, I think, 50 or 40 or 50 new ones. And so if you look here by sort by type, you will see these ones that all say credentials. This is a big chunk of them. So now, if you have AWS connection strings, we can search for those in things like Word documents or PowerPoint or databases or blob storage, etc. Okay, so Azure AD client secret, user credentials. We can just say, here's, and like the benefit of this is like, hey, where are all my Azure AD user credentials stored? If you go to the Content Explorer and you search for Azure AD credentials, if we had any, Azure AD storage account keys, we don't have any. It doesn't look like there's any of the credentials. But if there was any of them, you would see it. Azure storage account key, though, I got one of those in OneDrive. Where is it? And I can click into it and it will say, in this, oh, it's me too. Look at that. This is my demo user. So I've got some Azure storage account key someplace in my OneDrive here. In this Matt H. This is my demo account, the one that I beat up on. Bad Matt. Okay. But the point is that these sensitive information types out of the box, we give you a whole bunch of them. Those credential ones are some of the new ones. Also under trainable classifiers. This is more like, hey, I don't know exactly how to define to you what a contract is. I've got 300 of them that we've created over the last 40 years. Okay. So this is building out. But out of the box, we understand a ton of trainable classifiers, and you can add your own. So like what we added recently, and by the way, you can tell when we added them, although this date range is jacked up. I don't know why it's showing 0000. Hold on, please hold. I didn't mean to click on it. But the trainable classifiers, if you look at that date modified, the ones with the funkier dates, the newer ones are all the new ones. And so there's a ton of them here. But a trainable classifier is like, you don't have to tell us how to look for tax documents. You don't have to tell us how to look for contracts. You don't have to tell us how to look for like profanity. We understand profanity in Chinese. We understand it in German. We understand it in English, etc. I don't know why this is taking a while to load. So, but you can create your own trainable classifiers where you're like, hey, I'm going to teach you what an Acme contract looks like. And what you do is you basically dump something between 50 and 500. It's a range. You have to dump something between 50 and 500 of those into a SharePoint thing. And we basically use machine learning to figure them out. But you'll see we added a bunch recently. And so things like corporate sabotage, discrimination, ton of them. And I didn't mean to do that. And now it's going to build that list again. Anyways, while that's building, so that we added 20 of those recently, 20 additional trainable classifiers. By the way, exact data matches are driven by something in a database that you own. So you could be like, well, I don't want to tell you I won't have to define what a customer number is. I've got an Oracle database over there. And what you do is you basically point this tool at your Oracle database, and you give it the columns that you want us to look for. And if it sees any of those in any Word document or blob storage or database or whatever, it'll tell you where those are as well. Okay, so those are the different classification types. So, whew, we are back to PowerPoint here, I think. So we added a ton of trainable classifiers and new sensitive information types. Here's the big thing, guys. We have this thing called Ignite Book of News. And if you go to this URL, if I try and click on it here, if you go to that URL, it actually launches you up to all of the announcements that we made. So I'll just go, I created that short link this morning. I hope it works.
Ignite. I pasted it in the chat window, or Q&A window, excuse me, everyone, at the top as well.
Yeah, so here it is. And if you wanted to go to the table of contents, you can look at the security section and you'll see almost everything that I showed you today. Okay. So this is all the announcements that we made at Ignite. And if you go down here, like if I say like that thing where I showed disrupts ransomware, for example, which is right here, and then you get rid of the table of contents, boom. Now what you can do is it'll tell you all about what we added. And if you click learn more, there's like a document there that it sends you to. And there's that web page that I showed you was actually where'd it go? Anyways, it's in here somewhere. Where I went to the, oh, here it is. Automatic attack disruption. That was the web page that I showed you with that little animation right there. Remember, if you remember this, right? So all of that book of news is useful, but it's kind of a Russian nested doll of stuff, right? So you can start with the book of news itself, and then it'll lead you down the rabbit hole of other demonstrations and documentation. I'm losing my voice, team. What questions have you got?
So I know we've got a couple here, and everyone will. We've got about 5 minutes, honestly. So we're gonna try something here a little bit. If you do want to come off mute, please raise your hand, and we'll unmute you so you can ask your question. Otherwise, throw it in the Q&A window. Adam, I see you're the first person to show up there, so I'm going to pull you off mute and let you ask your question.
Adam.
And you should be able to come off mute, Adam.
There we go. Okay. So in regards to Intune EPM, is that something that will be able to be like a full EPM solution, essentially allow us to remove local admins altogether, similar to what CyberArk does? Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can make them standard users and then elevate them when you need to.
And specific applications, processes, files, etc.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a quick demo of it. If you go to, so another thing, if you just do ignite.microsoft.com, I think it's ignite.microsoft.com. There are like the sessions are pretty short. The nice thing about it being a hybrid event is most of the sessions are like 17 minutes or something like that. So like 17 to 20, I think the longest of them is 50 minutes, if that. Most of them are pretty short. But anyways, the one around the elevation, I believe they demoed. Yeah.
Perfect.
So Adam, yeah, cool.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, man. Appreciate you too. Thanks.
Yeah, and if you haven't registered for Ignite, I think you can still do it retroactively and get access to all those sessions. So I would highly suggest.
Yeah, I have it. I must have just missed the session.
No worries. And if not, then yeah. Well, if we don't have a demo, usually if there wasn't one, there usually there'll be something on Microsoft Mechanics. So if you go to YouTube and search for Microsoft Mechanics, usually that.
Familiar with that, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Excellent. Yeah. Cool. Who else? I see somebody else got their hand up.
Kim's got her hand up.
Hey, Kim.
Hi, Kim. Should be able to come off mute.
I might have missed this, and good to hear your voices, both Grady and Paul.
Hey,
I might have missed this, but I had a customer the day the post went out on the Intune upcharge add-on features, which I have posted in the chat on the Q&A. I had a customer asking about it, and when I read through the post, it looked the comments weren't very positive about the upcharging. Any thoughts on how to mitigate that once it gets released? I guess it's going to be Q3 for us.
I have no idea, Kim. I don't know
Okay,
what you mean by
thanks.
Yeah,
mitigating. I don't know what you mean by
I saw
mitigating.
that one. That's one of those situations. So everyone look at that link. There are some, I'll say most of the features are advanced that you're not going to have access to today anyway. There are additional capabilities. Unfortunately, from a pricing perspective, we won't know that until it goes GA, even internally here at Microsoft. So look for that as it gets closer. And Kim, we can talk about that offline
Okay.
from your customer side of things.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? Let me go back to the Q&A window. I think we might have covered everything. There was somebody on a tangent, anonymous. I understand why you stay anonymous when you start talking about Microsoft and SASE. I always like to, Paul, I always like to understand where people come from when they talk about SASE.
Yeah.
You know, we always go back to zero trust. So it doesn't, I don't know.
I can talk.
Different approaches to the same problem, I think, are
they're similar.
viewpoints. Yeah.
In general, the biggest difference between SASE and zero trust and SASE are peers of each other. They're not competitors. They're not one in terms of the other. They're hand in hand. The difference in SASE, which is secure access, secure edge, or something. I forget. I can never. I have so many acronyms.
Secure access service edge.
Secure access service edge. Thank you. Is that it's agent based in general, and our strategies are different in the sense that there is certainly a value in having an agent, but we also have to understand when you don't have an agent that we can still do the same type of zero trust, NIST 800, 207 stuff. So, so there, like I think that it's not a, it's not one or the other. It's kind of like, I think that they're related to each other. They're just different approaches that have the same outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay. So like, so in one, for us though, our belief is that ideally we would prefer to be agentless if at all possible for that kind of stuff. And so tools that we have in our arsenal, like app proxy, play a bigger role. So if you don't understand the why, I think that's where you should work with Patrick and Grady, and we can have a discussion about it some other time. But like, like app proxy plays a role. There's also some stuff coming that I was hopeful we were going to announce at Ignite. It's called Zero Trust Network Architecture, ZTNA, which also allows us to do some very interesting things for example, with app proxy, where I can even do non-standard ports as through the reverse proxy. I'm going to let that soak in for a second. But what that means is you can have a fat client running on your desktop talking through a reverse proxy, and I can do all the zero trust stuff, even if the application doesn't have that fat client doesn't have a clue about zero trust. Like I can do an MFA, or I could do conditional continuous access evaluation, which is a new thing in our arsenal of tools, where if anything changes about you in real time, I can throw you out of that client. That's kind of fun stuff. So I would just say, keep an eye here. But like, if you want to go into the details between SASE and what we think of as kind of the Microsoft zero trust, I'm happy to walk through it with you.
I'll also say it's not a only Microsoft story. We use partners, we use MISA, we use, from an infrastructure side. Those are all things that we have to bring together. We just view it from a zero trust. I'll use that marketing term because that's what we're going for. So it's different terminology to accomplish the same goal.
Yeah, but they'll call it zero trust. Go on. You're on here. Honoring? I think that's how you would say your name. Honoring? I saw your hand.
And you can unmute. Honoring Sue, if you want to unmute, you can.
Oh, I'm sorry. I needed to unmute. Okay, I wanted to ask about the CSPM. On the Defender for Cloud, it's free. if, because when I go to preview where to do the query, it's telling me to upgrade. Does that comes with a cost, or it is free as it's set in the portal?
I'd have to have a licensing person chime in. I try and avoid licensing. It's hard enough focusing on the technical stuff, but like, if you want to know what's free versus what's included, we'd have to go through. I'd have to have Patrick chime in, or we could have somebody talk to you offline. I mean, like, I'm not trying to avoid it. Like, it is really difficult for me to keep up with the technology. I can't focus on the licensing. It's just too much. So I just say, talk to them, Patrick, if you happen to know.
I don't know, but that could definitely be a follow-up that we can do. And probably the best thing to do is to check in with your account executive, and then we can get you that information.
Okay.
Yeah, Honorine, I'm not trying to avoid the question. It's just that I don't know the answer, and I'm not going to try and look it up with you. I don't want to like spend time like saying, oh, I'll start hunting through documentation and licensing stuff. So, but just send a message to your account team, and then we can get it answered for you. Promise. Yep.
All right. And with that, unfortunately, we're out of time. So if you want to throw your questions in the chat window, we can try and follow up with them later if you got any additional ones. Otherwise, please follow up with your account team. And Patrick, I'll hand it over to you.
Sounds great. Well, definitely just want to give a round of applause for Paul. Fantastic job as always. And thank you, Grady, for all your hard work. Reminder for everyone, we will be sending out the slide deck in a follow-up email along with a link to the recorded session. And kind of like we were mentioning, if you'd like to do any follow-up or one-to-one deep dives, best thing to do is get in touch with your account team and we can get that set up. Do want to call out, like Paul said, he doesn't have quota, but what he does get paid on is how valuable you find the sessions. And so what we did is we put in a survey link that you can fill out. It takes about 5 minutes. And if you'd be able to do that, that would be huge and we'd really appreciate it. And then besides that, I hope everybody has a great rest of your day and thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
everyone.
you.